Hello, and many thanks for joining us on the program. I am Imoni Amarere. In the usual tradition of this program, we shall today be taking a critical look at some of the new policies of the Nigerian government and what impacts they would have on the people. Now, you will recall that last week, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu signed 4 executive orders, all of them relating to taxes and taxation. The orders either deferred or suspended the commencement of some taxes paid by individuals and companies. They include the Finance Act Effective Date Variation Order 2023, which deferred the commencement date from May 2023 to September 1, 2023, in compliance with the 90 days minimum advance notice for tax changes as contained in the 2017 National Tax Policy. Customs Excise Tariff Variation Amendment Order 2023 is the second one which shifted the commencement date for the tax changes from March 27, 2023 to August 1, 2023, in line with the National Tax Policy. The third executive order is that suspending 5% tax on telecommunication services and the excise duties escalation on locally manufactured products. The fourth of the executive orders deals with the suspension of the newly introduced green tax by way of excise tax on single-use plastics, including plastic containers and bottles, and the suspension of import tax adjustment levy on certain vehicles. The justification given for the executive orders are to ease tax burden on business, alleviate hardship on Nigerians, and to increase productive activities, as well as eliminate multiple taxation, anti-business inhibitions, and drive towards achieving higher gross domestic product growth and an appreciable reduction in unemployment rate through job creation. It is also expected to create a stimulus for business growth. The 2017 National Tax Policy, on which some of these orders are based, prescribes a minimum of 90 days notice from government to taxpayers before any tax changes can take effect. This is meant to give taxpayers and businesses reasonable time to adjust to new tax regimes. The Finance Act 2023 and the Customs Excise Tariff Order obviously did not give the required minimum notice, thereby putting businesses in violation of the new tax regime, even before the changes have been gazetted. Now, how are these executive orders likely to affect businesses and the revenue generation of the federal government? How will the individual Nigerian be impacted by the implementation of the new orders, especially against the backdrop of the prevailing harsh economic situation in the country? These are the issues we will be taking a look at on the program today, and we'll have joining us business and tax specialists who will help us to understand the issues, break them down for us so that we can better understand the executive orders and the taxes that they relate to. We will get to meet them right after this short break. Stay with us. Thank you so much for staying with us. Some have described the decisions, or some of the decisions that have been taken by the Tinubu administration in recent times, as bold and drastic decisions. Some others have said they are disruptive economic policy decisions. Whatever you think they are, the latest, of course, of these decisions are the 4 executive orders on taxes and taxation that the president signed last week. We are joined in the studio by Dr. Kennedy Iwundu. Dr. Iwundu is the chairman, Chartered Institute of Nigeria, Abuja District. He is a tax consultant. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much
for joining us.
Thank you.
We're also joined online by Dr. Muda Yusuf. Dr. Yusuf is the Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. Dr. Yusuf is joining us virtually from Lagos. Dr. Yusuf, thank you so much for finding time to join us. All right, hopefully we should be connecting with Dr. Yusuf in a while, but let's begin from here. Dr. Iwundu, as a tax consultant, how do you understand the 4 executive orders that the president signed last week?
Okay, thank you very much. The president made a promise that he will fight multiple taxation because Nigerians have complained that there's so much multiple taxation, so many taxes across the board, both federal, state, and local government, levies and all over the place. So the president made a promise that he would tackle multiple taxation. So by suspending the excise tax on telecommunication and suspending the green tax is a step to match his words that he's going to tackle multiple taxation. You know that what we saw in Nigeria, especially in the recent past, is that every sector comes in for a tax. There's problem in the health sector. They say pay tax. There's problem in the educational sector. They have education trust fund. There's a problem in technology, NIDA. There's a problem, NASIMA. There's a problem in police levy. So it looks like every sector that has a problem, you bring a tax on that sector.
It falls back on tax.
Exactly.
To fund that sector.
Exactly. Even recently, we would have had NYSC tax. So there was one that was coming, a NYSC tax, to fund a NYSC. Before they say, hold on this one.
Even when the NYSC itself has statutory allocation from the federation account.
No, what the ideology of those who are bringing in tax in each sector is that they possibly want to stop the statutory allocation and let that particular sector organization generate their revenue. Their plan is to make every agency of government to be a revenue generating agency, which is wrong. It is against our national tax policy. Our national tax policy says that we only have one revenue generating agency at federal. You only have one revenue generating agency at state. And you only have one revenue generating agency at the local. That's what our national tax policy said. And tax is guided by tripods of taxation: tax policy, tax legislation, and tax administration. The tax policy guides the tax legislation, and the tax legislation guides the tax administration. So I think the president is trying to rewrite the wrongs. He's trying to look at our national tax policy to say, are things being done the way we are supposed to do it in line with our national tax policy? And if it's not being done that way, then we need to start correcting these wrongs. And that is the reason why he started by varying the commencement dates of the 2 Finance Act and that of a Tariff Variation Act. Because our national tax policy made it clear that when there are changes in the law, in the tax law, you should give a minimum of 3 months to taxpayers to study the law, to get planned. That's why we have tax planning. You have to plan for it before implementation starts. But what we saw under Buhari administration was you make a law today, you say it's starting yesterday. We had that case in Education Tax Act, State Fund Tax. When it was amended, to increase to 2.5%. Instead of saying start it 2022, they say no, it starts 2021.
So it was made retroactive.
Exactly, very retroactive. Laws are not implemented in retrospect. Laws are supposed to be implemented progressively. If you say, let's make a law that anybody that stole a cock will be jailed for 5 years, you now make that law and start catching people who stole cock many years ago to jail. It is in retrospect. It is retroactive. And that is not what our law is supposed to be. So I believe that the president did a right thing by varying the commencement date. If you check the May that was signed the 2023 finance, that you observe that you have June, you have July, you have August. That's the 3 months. Then implementation starts from 1st of September. And that's how it's supposed to be. If they even say minimum, means that there could be maximum. In some countries, they give 6 months. In some countries, they give 1 year. It is a global practice that when you amend the laws, when you bring in new laws, you allow taxpayers for proper tax planning. You allow them to understand the laws. You allow the practitioners to get use of it before you start implementation. You don't make a law today and say implementation starts last year or starts last month.
So the question to ask then, for people like you who are in the sector,
Yes.
So why was it allowed to go on? I mean, the retroactive nature of these laws. If a law was, if a law or a policy says this is what it should be, a minimum of 90 days before, why was it then signed and made retroactive and it was not challenged?
It was challenged. Some of us challenged it. Even when the FRS staff were arguing with us, we told them you don't apply laws in retrospect. So it should be progressive. They say, no, that is what the commencement date states in the white paper. I say it's wrong. But one good thing, one of us, one of the practitioners and the client went to court. And the court ruled, the High Court ruled that Finance Act cannot be implemented in retrospect. It is clear. We thought that ruling would have made the government to subsequently make this 2023 Finance Act to align with a futuristic implementation. But despite that court ruling that you can apply Finance Act in retroactive nature, they went ahead, signed it on 28th of May, and said the implementation starts on 1st of May. It is too backward. When we say some of these things, and sometimes people think you are just arguing unnecessarily, but the reality is that I'm sure the advisors of the current president are doing well, and he's also listening to them. Because you need professionals to be with you, professionals that will guide you, professionals that say, this is what our tax policy says, this is what our tax law says, we have to bear our tax laws. Because we have professionals in the field, they are all educated, they are all enlightened. Whatever you do, they will notice infractions. So let's obey this. If you don't like that national tax policy, you can amend it to suit your purpose. But in as much as that national tax policy is existing, you are obligated to ban with it.
All right, let's bring in Dr. Muda Yusuf, who is joining us virtually from Lagos. Dr. Yusuf, thank you so much for finding time to join us.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Great. Good to have you. You are in the business community. Let me ask first and foremost, how the implementation of these policies, which Dr. Wundu has just described as being applied retroactively, affected the business sector in the past?
Well, let me say that the business sector have been overburdened by taxation, and sometimes there are things like that smacks of arbitrariness and impunity in tax administration and even in tax legislations. For instance, the Finance Act, ideally, before an act is enacted, there should be public hearing. You know, that is what we expected. And we made this complaint when the Finance Act 2023 was first presented for assent by the president. How do you, legislate or put forth such a legislation that has far-reaching implications on so many parts of our tax legislation that the stakeholders will not have an input in it? So for some reasons, it was delayed, and we thought that the stakeholders will now have a fresh opportunity to be part of that legislation. But it didn't happen. All we saw was that few days to the exit of the former president, it had been signed into law without the normal procedure of allowing stakeholders at least to have some engagement on it. Because if you have had such public hearing, in the true sense of it, not the rushed kind of public hearing, many of the issues that are being raised now will have been raised at that time. We had a whole lot of issues with the excise duty, for instance. We already had a regime of excise duty, which was supposed to run for about 3 or 4 years. It was supposed to end in 2024. That has not expired. We now suddenly have another regime of excise duty. And the manufacturers complain that how can you have something on the basis of which we already were planning, and suddenly you change it even without recourse to the stakeholders. So these things create a whole lot of problems for the private sector. So apart from the issue of multiplicity of taxation, which my colleague in the studio has highlighted, the manner of legislation, the arbitrariness, and sometimes the impunity that comes with the way these taxes are imposed is also an issue. I mean, the retroactive nature of the taxes is also a problem. Because how do you plan as a business person? When you already have a schedule of tax, you have planned for it, suddenly you have a law that has been signed by the president, which is taking effect retroactively. So we appreciate what President Tinubu has done, at least giving some room to allow the system to comply with best practices and given enough notice in line with the national tax policy. But that is not to say that there are no issues with the Finance Act, because what has happened with the Finance Act is just a deferment of the effective date. There are issues there which require some engagement with the authorities. I mean, the tertiary education tax is being reviewed to 3% from 2.5%. Then there's also a provision in the Act that says that the president can impose excise duty on services, all services for that matter. It wasn't quite specific what kind of services will attract excise duty. So that is it as far as the Finance Act is concerned. But on the excise duty and the green tax that were suspended, I think that is a welcome development. At least it has been put on hold in response to the complaints of manufacturers about the burden that will impose on the manufacturing sector. So it's going to give manufacturers some relief in terms of how to operate and operate competitively, because the pressure of production costs, the pressure of competitiveness, the pressure of erosion of profit margins, the challenges of weak purchasing power, the challenges of high energy costs, the challenges of high import duty, all these things are putting a lot of pressure on those who are in the real sector of the economy. And how do you promote production if you have so much an overwhelming pressure, so much headwinds against those who are in production? How do you create jobs? You can't treat manufacturing the way you would treat banking or the way you would treat the trading sector. We have to give some concession to manufacturing, taking into account all the challenges that they are facing. So that is what it is. It's a relief, but there is still room for further engagement, even within the framework of the Finance Act.
Dr. Yusuf, let's take a step backwards and look at the 2017 tax policy and how that policy, or how these new taxes and taxation policies align with that omnibus tax policy.
Well, basically, the tax policy prescribes that there should be notice, 90 days notice before you make any adjustment. So this particular executive order is to bring the current tax legislation or taxes that have been imposed in line with that policy. Then there is also the prescription in the national tax policy that we should gradually move away from direct tax into indirect tax. And the whole idea is to reduce the pressure on those who are investing in the economy. Because when you put too much pressure on those who are investing, even before they begin to produce, before they begin to create jobs, before they begin to make profits, you can create the entire investment environment. And you need investment itself to create employment. Because the business is not just about tax, it's only a business that is thriving that can pay tax sustainably. If you overtax those who are investing at the investment stage, then ultimately the economy suffers. Because you don't only lose revenue ultimately, you lose the opportunity to create wealth, you lose the opportunity to create employment. So the thrust of the national policy is to give a lot of breather, a lot of room for investors to be able to invest, so that as their investment is growing, as they prosper, then you can come and tax either through VAT or through company income tax or whatever it is. But the investment will have grown in the first place. So that is the whole spirit of moving away from direct tax and moving gradually to indirect tax. And with indirect tax, you can even bring a lot more people into the tax net. I mean, you look at their consumption, you look at their properties, you look at a whole lot of things you look at. And from there, you can begin to impose taxes and get more revenue. So that is the whole thrust, and this is a gradual shift, towards that national tax policy.
All right, Dr. Wood, let's bring you in here. I saw you were shaking your head vigorously while Dr. Yusuf was speaking, which tends to give me the impression that you do agree with some of the things, or if not all of the things he said. Yes.
Yeah, the national tax policy wants Nigeria to have a seamless tax collection and tax administration process and system. For example, the national tax policy wanted a single line collection from federal government, from state, and from the local government. Right now, Nigeria tax system and structure is in contradiction with the national tax policy. Nigeria developed some time ago what we call taxes and levies approved list for collection, where the federal government were given about 9 taxes to collect. The states were given about 20-something taxes and levies to collect, while the local government were also given about 20-something levies to collect. So if you have an investor who wants to come into Nigeria to invest and say, please, let me see your tax policy, let me see your tax laws, let me see your tax structure, and you hand him over that taxes and levies approved list of collection, by the time he must have seen the 9 taxes from the federal government, about 20-something taxes and levies from state, and about 20-something taxes from local government, the investor will go back. Definitely the investor will go back, because you wouldn't like, and the funny thing is that these taxes are being collected both orthodox and unorthodox form. There are some states they have to use nails to stop you to collect the tax. There are some places even the non-state actors collect the tax. And if you don't pay, you're not going to operate there. So I feel the president recently, you didn't mention that the president recently set up a committee for tax reforms, headed by one of our friends. Although the reference was not given to us, the terms of reference of that committee, and also the composition was not given, but one of our friends was made the chairman of that committee, who is a partner in PricewaterhouseCoopers. Now, we expect the committee to look into what we are talking about, to come up with a harmonized tax structure that is seamless, where investors can have confidence that they'll come in and it will be easier for them to invest and pay tax. One of the principles of taxation is simplicity. Your tax system must be simple and seamless. in the sense that investors will understand what they are supposed to do. But when somebody comes, people will knock at his door, say, there is this tax. He said, I'm not even aware that this tax. He said, we have laws for it. It becomes complex. So there's the point that we expect that the president didn't only suspend some of these taxes or vary the commencement date. He also went further to set up a committee that will drive the tax reforms. We expect this committee, if they start work, to collect input from Nigerians, from professionals, from Institute of Chartered Accountants of Nigeria, from Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, from Association of National Accountants of Nigeria, from the organized private sector, from the Manufacturers Association, and bring them together for us to have a seamless way upon which our tax system will go. Because as far as tax is concerned, it is the major sustainable form of revenue to the government. There was an era we rely on oil for Nigeria to run. Now,
we still do.
We rely on oil, but now government is moving away gradually from oil to taxation. Taxation is the only sustainable source of revenue all over the world. Any other source of revenue can fail you. But where you have an organized tax system, it cannot fail you. So we want a situation where the government comes out with a well-organized, well-harmonized, well-structured tax system so that Nigerians will have confidence to pay. And also investors, both local and foreign, will have confidence to invest. Right now, some people are not investing. Do you know what some people are doing? Instead of them to produce, they import. Instead of them to produce in Nigeria, somebody may have 2-3 billion to go into business, a business he likes. By the time they show him what he's going to face, especially where we have decayed infrastructures, definitely the person will say, no, I better import. Because once you set up that your factory, AMAC will land.
AMAC being the Abuja
yes,
Municipal
Environmental
Area
Protection
Council, which is
Agency
equivalent to a
exactly.
local government.
Yes, they will land. Other revenue agencies will land. FCT IRS will land. FIRS will land. Everybody will start landing.
And you have to pay these various taxes to these various agencies of government.
Exactly. So, and even when you proceed to say, I want to obtain ITF, you pay. I want to obtain an SITF, you pay. I want to do this, you pay. So it has been structured in a way that almost every revenue of government is becoming a generating agency of revenue. But that is against our national tax policy. A national tax policy is supposed to recognize one agency, Federal Revenue Service, as the sole agency of revenue generation, upon which this revenue generated will be sent to the federation account and allocation be given to
the tiers of government,
including agencies of government. But as it is, everybody is collecting tax. Everybody is collecting tax. Agencies of government has been made to be revenue-generating agencies, which is in contradiction with our national tax policy. And this is discouraging investment. It is discouraging business. It is causing problem in the tax arena.
Dr. Yusuf, let me come to you. These 4 executive orders may not have necessarily addressed all the issues about tax and taxation in Nigeria. But as we are aware, the president has also set up a committee to carry out a reform. What are your expectations in that regard?
With what my colleague in the studio has said. First, there is need for proper engagement with stakeholders in the economy. It's not as if investors don't want to pay tax, but we need a rationalization, harmonization, and predictability of the tax environment. Because these things are critical for investors' confidence, whether they are domestic or whether they are foreign. So I expect that as this committee, just as he said, we haven't seen the terms of reference yet, but the committee should engage critical stakeholders in the economy, because different sectors face different kind of challenges around taxation. There are some tax issues that are cross-cutting across sectors. There are some tax issues that are peculiar to sectors. So there has to be engagement of stakeholders to discuss the challenges of taxation in terms of the number, in terms of the implementation, and in terms of dispute resolution on taxes. So that for me is very critical. Secondly, most regulatory agencies have become revenue generating agencies. Some of them are even given targets as to how much they must generate, to the extent that some of them even abandon the core responsibility of regulation and prioritize the amount of revenue that they want to generate. So beyond just paying the regular taxes like VAT, company tax, and all this other retinue of education tax, NETDA, Police Trust Fund, and the rest of them, for each regulator that you interface with, there are amounts that you pay. They may not call it taxation. They can call it renewal fee. They can call it licensing fee, whatever it is. These things exert a lot of pressure on investors. And just as he said, this thing is discouraging investment. There are some billionaires who don't even have visible offices. They have more money than those who are setting up factories. Exactly. What framework do you have to be able to bring such people into the tax net? In many other jurisdictions, only about 15 or 20% gives the government about 80% of the revenue because of the nature of inequality of income. Of course, in Nigeria, we have a similar situation. There is high level of inequality. So the Pareto principle must apply. Where the 10, 15% of the population should be giving us about 80% of the revenue. That population in terms of citizens or in terms of corporates. That is the way it should be. So that you stop harassing all these small vulnerable segments of the society. Because the whole philosophy of taxation, it will be able to extract value from those who have the ability to pay to support the vulnerable segments of the economy. It's an income redistribution instrument. That is what taxation is. But if you don't have a proper structure to capture the top hierarchy of those who have the income in the society, then there's a problem. And we have to put less pressure on those who are investing. I mean, the tax officials get to your business premises. Sometimes they assess you based on the size of your premises, even when the business was already going down. And because the real sector, those in manufacturing, hotels, and all of that, because they are very visible, the pressure on them is a lot. Because people just see assets, they see people moving up and down, they have the misconceived notion that you must be making a lot of money. And we know what all these people are going through. By the time they spend money on diesel, they spend money on they struggle with the post-import duty, they pay their staff, and nothing is left. So the engagement has to be robust. It has to be inclusive. And we also need to streamline it. And there are other smarter ways of making money without disrupting the entire economy. We should use a lot more technology. We should be able to have information of the movement of money within the financial system. There are billionaires who are just sitting in some five-star hotels. They don't have offices. How do you capture them? There are properties all over in Abuja, Lagos, and some other cities. How much taxes are we collecting from those properties? Those properties are not built by small people. So these are the things that we need to do, to create a tax environment that is supportive of investment and that will also ensure that you have very good revenue yield. Those things are not mutually exclusive.
All right, Dr. Wundu, let me come to you. How critical is taxation to a country or a nation's economic development?
Yeah, tax is very critical to economic development of a country. And that is where government is relying to fund the programs and projects. Because if you raise money from taxation, you give it back to the people by funding programs and projects of the government. Doctor, who joined us on the virtual, made a very critical point. In some countries, few people generate the money. Like in the UK today, about 1% or 2% of taxpayers generate almost 50% of revenue.
For government?
Yes. In US, 10% of top taxpayers generate almost 90% of their revenue. That is where we go back to say taxation is for the essence of redistribution of income. And this redistribution of income means you collect from the rich for the benefit of the poor. Because if the rich people pay tax, for example, I use it to give free education, you can see that the poor people who don't have money to go to school will benefit from it. If the rich man pays tax, the rich people pay tax, and he use it to fund free primary health care, you can see the poor man benefiting from it. That's what we call it redistribution of income. The rich pays for the benefit of the poor. But is it what we are doing in Nigeria? Nigeria lacks taxation of high net worth individuals. Nigeria lacks taxation of high net worth individuals. And this is where government should rely to generate revenue to run the country. Will this government have that political will? Just as he mentioned, there are so many properties across Abuja. There are so many estates. They are empty. Are there not people that are building these properties? Are there not people that build these estates? How much tax are they paying? The other day, they went to the market to say the market women should pay tax. I agree. They should pay tax, VAT. They should pay VAT. But why are we not looking for these people who buy properties 1 billion in Maitama to pay tax? That is the essence of taxation. Redistribution of income. The rich pays for the benefit of the poor. So I believe that Tinubu'S administration should consider taxation of high net worth individuals. And it's very simple. If you want to buy a property in Maitama 1 billion, they'll ask you, where is your tax clearance certificate? How much have you paid? Because if you have income to buy a property 1 billion, you must have paid tax to government. That's how it's done abroad. You can't go and buy a property 1 billion and you have not paid government anything. Where did you make the money from? So I think he would think towards that direction. And that's the only way. Let me tell you the truth. Nigeria tax to GDP ratio is still very low.
I was coming to that, yes. Now that we have talked about it, what is the ratio?
No, formerly, the ratio was 6%. But recently, FIRS, in conjunction with the other agency, varied it to 10%.
But what is the global standard?
The global standard, we're supposed to be having 15 and above. South Africa is having 35%. Some countries in Africa is having 17, 13. And this is where taxation is all about. We varied it from 6% to 10%. Despite moving from 6 to 10%, we are still one of the lowest globally, even in Africa. So how do you generate this income? You have to bring in taxation of high net worth individuals. There are so many high net worth individuals in the country. They are not paying tax.
That now speaks to the whole issue of how transparent the taxation system has been in Nigeria.
Exactly.
Because you're talking about high net worth individuals who have the money to purchase properties of up to 1 billion and even more. But you see that some of these transactions are done privately without the attention of government agencies being drawn to them.
The attention of government agencies are there. If I'm buying a property in my time at 1 billion, the person who is selling the property to me, won't he have transfer of documents to me? Won't I go to Aegis or FCDA to perfect my document? It's at that point they'll ask you, this property you are buying, have you paid tax, attached tax on it? Nigeria has abandoned or is not so serious about capital gain tax. I keep saying it anywhere I go. A capital gain tax is tax you pay on the gain you made on disposal of property. If I bought a property 100 million and I'm selling it at 150 million, I've made a gain of 50 million naira. The law requires that I should pay 10% on that gain. 10% of 50 million, which is 5 million. Nobody is looking at that. So this government can look into capital gain tax. There's so much disposal of properties in Abuja, in Lagos, and all over the place. And good thing, capital gain tax is a concurrent tax. Concurrent in the sense that the state collects, the federal collects. So even a state governor can implement capital gain tax in his state. If you have a property, you are selling it, come and pay 10% of the gain you have made. If not, we are not going to perfect your papers. And you see them generating money. They don't need to come to Abuja to get federal allocation. But the question is that, do they have the political will? We need this government to have a political will. In fact, I need Tinubu'S administration to have a political will in taxation. And I'm assuring you, Nigeria GDP, tax to GDP ratio will rise above 15. And it goes, proper implementation, harmonize the tax structure to attract investment, bring in taxation of high net worth individuals, go into property tax, go into capital gain tax, widen the tax net, the money is there. And another important thing the administration needs to do is also using technology in tax collection. I also keep saying that. The Federal Revenue Service have tried so much to deploy technology solution in its administration, but they are yet to deploy technology in tax collection. You don't need to go and ask somebody how much VAT have you paid. If you have the system where at the point of payment, the VAT is being remitted instantly. You walk into a hotel, you pay your VAT, the owner of the hotel collects VAT. At the end of the year, decide what to pay to government. But
or may not even
it might not even remit any VAT to the government. That's why FIRS is busy writing for VAT verification. But if you have a technology in place, as you enter the hotel to pay for your accommodation for food, at the point of payment, the VAT is automatically remitted to government. I assure you that VAT generation may even get to 30 trillion. Because the revenue authority don't need to come back to the man to do verification. The system is there. So the administration has to consider collecting tax through technology. The administration has to consider taxation of high net worth individual. The administration has to consider capital gain tax. The administration has to consider property tax. And I tell you, Nigeria don't need to borrow money. We're going to generate this tax, and Nigeria will develop.
Dr. Yusuf, let me turn to you and to ask you how these executive orders are likely to affect or impact on the investment environment in Nigeria. I ask that question against the backdrop of the fact that if you look at the third executive order, which suspended the 5% tax on telecommunication services and the excise duties escalation on locally manufactured products. How is that likely to help in boosting the investment environment in Nigeria?
It's going to be positive for the investment environment. Normally, we need an economy that encourages production. Imposition of excise duty negates that objective, because excise duty is primarily on production. And why it's even more burdensome is that it is based on the value of what you produce. It's not based on the percentage of your profit. And it's in addition to other taxes that you have been paying. So if you have an economy that says you want to create jobs, you want to promote production, you want to build an inclusive economy, you cannot have a tax regime that practically penalizes production. That is what the excise duty has done. So the removal of that, at least it has been suspended and put on hold, unlike the Finance Act, which was suspended to resume either in September or so. This has been suspended and put on hold. That is a breather for those who are investing in that sector. So to that extent, it is positive. Then there's also a perception about the general tax environment, which this Taiwo Oyedele committee is going to look at. Because you need to create a tax environment that is investment friendly, that will be, not be arbitrary, that will not have too much of discretion, and that will give room for very seamless dispute resolution mechanism. Because sometimes you can also disagree with the tax authorities. There must be a very easy way for you to seek a redress. So those are the ways in which the tax environment can incentivize investment. Then we have a whole lot going on in the oil and gas area. That is one area where we can make a whole lot of money. Right now, just from this subsidy thing, we're expecting that close to 7 trillion, and it will be saved. Apart from the opportunities it will give for more investment to come into oil and gas. Then look at what is happening with the transparency of oil production, oil output, the recording. Look at the billions of dollars that have been lost. So a whole lot can happen in that area. Yes, it's good to diversify the economy, but the oil and gas is still a major cash cow. If you manage it well, if you plug all the loopholes, and if you tackle all the impunity about this oil theft, I mean, those who are stealing the oil, they cannot be bigger than the state. Look at what other oil producing companies are making from oil at this time. By now, our reserves should be overflowing with dollars. Our currency should be getting stronger. If only we have managed the oil and gas space very well. And I'm hoping that the Tinubu administration will commit to not only reforming the place, but restoring sanity to that place. A whole lot can happen. We can easily double or even triple the revenue of government, both in Naira and in foreign exchange. So if you do all of this, apart from helping the general macroeconomic environment, apart from ensuring that there is better transparency in the tax environment, it will help the government to improve its fiscal space. Yeah. All this problem of high fiscal deficit, high debt burden, borrowing here and there, all those things will diminish. It will reduce drastically. And if you have a reduction in all of those things, it will impact positively on the macroeconomic environment. And what I mean by that is that we will likely have low inflation, we have a more stable exchange rate, which will be beneficial to everybody. Whether you are in business, whether you are individuals, whether you are SMEs, whether you are large enterprises, you need that conducive macroeconomic environment. And fixing the fiscal space, stopping all these leakages is going to help. And above all, whatever additional revenue we are getting from these reforms, there must be value for money in its utilization. Yeah. Because there's a great danger that for those in government, whether at federal, state, or local government, the more money they have, the more issues of corruption that you have. The more people spend money to buy SUVs and all those things, that may not necessarily impact on the welfare of the people. That is very critical. And that is why it is important as we progress in this administration, the allocation to each state and local government should be published so that the citizens themselves can hold their governments into account. For a local government, you have an allocation of 100 billion or 50 billion or 20 billion, you have to account to your people how you spend it. The citizens must be involved. So we need to scale up citizen participation in this democracy. Because you cannot leave everything to EFCC. The EFCC can do only so much, or the ICPC. The citizens must be involved. So that social contract is also important in taxation. The more people see that, the more we can raise the level of trust between the citizens and government. All those things are also very critical in creating a very good tax environment.
Thank you so much, Dr. Muda Yusuf. Let me come back to you here very quickly in 30 seconds to wrap up.
Yeah.
Your expectations of the committee that has now been put in place to review or to reform the tax system in Nigeria. Very quickly.
Yeah, the expectation is that the committee should advise the president on how to harmonize our tax structure and also make sure that the administration imbibe in what we call tax transparency. Tax transparency has two legs. The taxpayer has to be transparent enough to declare his taxes and pay, while the government, who is collecting these taxes, has to be transparent in accounting for the money. Citizens still believe that government is not accountable, therefore I will not pay my tax. So please, they need to boost the morale of Nigerians to pay tax. And in doing so, there must be tax transparency. At all levels of government, we even suggested that the state government should be publishing their annual report. There should be a law that the state government should publish their annual report. Every year, show us what you have collected for federal allocation, internal generated revenue, other sources, and how you use it. Publish it, let us read in the newspaper. We should have a law in that place so that when you say you spend 100 billion on a 1 kilometer road, we'll be looking at it there. So there needs to be transparency so that Nigeria can move forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Dr. Kennedy Iwundu is the chairman, Chartered Institute of Taxation of Nigeria, the Abuja district. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
And Dr. Muda Yusuf, he joined us virtually from Lagos. He is the Chief Executive Officer, Center for the Promotion of Private Enterprise. Thank you so much, Dr. Yusuf, for giving us your time this morning.
Thank you very much.
Great.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank
that's
you,
our program for today. Please join us again when we bring you a fresh edition of People, Politics, and Power. We thank you for investing your time with us. Bye for now.